Something tonight after the audit report.
Get on?
I do.
Good. Does Regina know?
I can do about it. Timing wise. We're the last.
Packet. You didn't have that piece, but the bigger version was in your packet. 10B.
All right, it is 7 p.m. here at 100 State Street in Beloit, Wisconsin. It's time for the regularly scheduled meeting of the Beloit City Council. It is Monday, July 6th, 2015. And I'd like to call the meeting to order and roll call.
All councilors are present.
Second item is Pledge of Allegiance. Will you please stand? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Item 3 would be special orders of the day and announcements. We have none today, so we'll move on to item 4, public hearings, item 4A.
A resolution authorizing an amended conditional use permit to allow expanded contractor office and storage yard uses in a DH Development Holding District for property located at 2100 Newark Road.
Madam Director.
Stephen Franks of 3 Franks Services LLC has applied to amend the existing conditional use permit that was approved on April 7, 2014, which allowed him to operate his asphalt paving business on the property. He purchased it in May. He began a substantial cleanup operation. The prior owners operated a trash hauling business, and the site was a mess when he purchased it. He has cleaned it all up. What he's proposing now is the construction of a 3,000 square foot office and storage addition to an existing storage shop building, along with the temporary use of a converted manufactured home that will be used as office space during the construction process. He'll continue to rent the house as a single-family dwelling. The house is on the property. This was considered a major change in the use of the property under Condition 5 of the 2014 Conditional Use Permit, which was included in your packet. We did go out and look at the site, and he did already comply with Conditions 2 and 3, which were required to be done already. Plan Commission did review this on June 17th and voted unanimously to recommend approval, subject to conditions which are listed in the resolution, which are that the conditions imposed on the applicant's 2014 conditional use remain in full force and effect. This amended conditional use allows a 3,000 square foot addition to an existing storage shop building, along with the temporary use of a converted manufactured home that will be used as office space during the construction process. The temporary office use shall be discontinued when the building addition has been completed, or in 3 years following approval, whichever occurs first. A gravel area shall be paved at the conclusion of this project. The applicant may continue to rent the existing single-family dwelling, but must maintain a rental dwelling permit, which he has done to date. And the applicant shall obtain an architectural review certificate, a certificate of zoning compliance, and a building permit prior to beginning construction of the addition. And then our standard condition on major changes coming back through this public process, or minor changes being able to be approved administratively. And Mr. Franks is here this evening if you have any questions for him.
Thank you. I'd like to open the public hearing on item 4A. Any persons wishing to come forward and speak on item 4A, please approach to the podium and state your name and address. Second call for persons to come forward and speak on item 4A. Third and final call for persons to come forward and speak on item 4A. Hearing none, I'll close the public hearing on item 4A, and to get it on the table, I'll entertain a motion.
Motion for approval.
I'll second.
Moved by Lubke and second by DeForest. Councilor, comments and questions? Councilor DeForest.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Mr. Frakes for the improvements on the property that have already been made, and I'm pleased that you're continuing to invest in the property, so I wanted to thank you for that. Just for clarity, Ms. Christensen, I'm sorry, I know you're battling a... you had said that he already meant conditions 2 and 3, but I was confused.
Of the original conditional use.
Okay.
So if you go back in the packet, the applicant shall create a parking area that is set back further than the rental office building with a minimum of 6 stalls, shall stripe the lot by June 1st, 2014, and he shall pave the existing driveway by June 1st, 2014.
Okay, great, thank you.
So those are the 2 conditions.
I had a different list of conditions, so.
Yeah, so it's confusing. So
Okay,
there's 2
thank
in
you.
there. Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Franks.
Any other questions or comments on this item? Hearing none, I'll call the matter. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Item passes 7-0. Item 4B.
is a resolution authorizing a conditional use permit to allow a rooming house in a C1 office district for property located at 1105 East Grand Avenue.
Mrs. Christensen.
The applicant, Matt Finnegan, is seeking a conditional use permit to allow a rooming house at 1105 East Grand Avenue. The proposal includes 4 single occupancy sleeping rooms and 1 efficiency apartment that'll house like a property manager. He purchased the house approximately 2 years ago. It's been sitting vacant. His plan is that the first floor, there will be first floor efficiency with a private bath and laundry for an on-site manager, and they would be responsible for all aspects of the property. The 4 sleeping rooms, which would be on the second floor, would be furnished with beds and dressers at a minimum. The rental term for the tenants would be monthly. Our neighbor did come out to the public hearing on this at Plan Commission, and he did express concerns over the consequences of a change in property ownership. He wasn't real excited about a rooming house, but was with Matt Finnegan and Matt Finnegan's ownership of it. Plan Commission did add a new condition which said that if the property ownership changed, that the conditional use would basically end, it would expire. At that meeting, Plan Commission did also add a couple of other conditions. They did not want to see any kind of signs displayed on the property. The applicant did not intend to display signage, but they wanted to be sure that there would be no signage. That the transfer in property ownership would result in the expiration of the CUP, and that if the required parking spaces may be located on the adjacent property, and if they are located on the adjacent property, that there should be a shared parking agreement so that if the adjacent property ever sold, we would still have parking provided for this site. So Plan Commission did recommend approval, subject to the 11 conditions which are listed in the resolution, which is that the property owner must obtain a rental dwelling permit the rooming house, that the rental term lengths for sleeping rooms will be monthly in order to maintain stability in the neighborhood and to prevent common problems associated with renting with a week or day. That the applicant will provide at least 3 parking spaces designated by signs for residents and guests of the rooming house, regardless of future tenant car ownership rates. The owner may rent a maximum of 4 sleeping rooms and 1 efficiency apartment. The rooming house will house a maximum of 5 persons, including the manager. The applicant shall adhere to all regulations, including but not limited to those found in Section 7.32 of the Property Maintenance Code and Section 8.16 of the Plumbing Maintenance Code. No signs of any type may be displayed on the property. The transfer in property ownership will result in the immediate expiration of the CUP. If the required parking spaces for tenants are provided on the property adjacent, the applicant needs to provide staff with a shared parking agreement. If city staff receives complaints stemming from the lack of on-site management from tenants, neighboring property owners, or elected or appointed city officials, staff reserves the right to re-review the conditions of the conditional use permit with the Plan Commission and City Council. And then our standard major changes coming back through this public process and minor changes being approved administratively. And Mr. Finnegan and the property manager are here this evening if you have any questions for them.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to open the public hearing on item 4B. Anyone wishing to come forward and speak on item 4B, please approach to the podium and state your name and address.
Hello, Rick McGrath, 1747 Sherwood. I appreciate the opportunity to speak on this. I did have an opportunity to speak to a number of the neighbors, and if I could hand this to you. Most of whom are now aware of this occurrence. Most all of whom expressed concerns of different kinds. I acknowledge that there's certainly a need for this sort of housing. Everybody needs a place to stay. For those folks who are in these circumstances and have these needs, my understanding is that oftentimes these are facilities with oversight and that sort of thing. My concern is the precedent that it might set. Will we see more rooming houses in Beloit? Will we see other and the property owner I know to be a good and honorable gentleman with a huge heart and the best of intentions. But I'm concerned about a rooming house I'm not sure I would want a rooming house next door to me. Maybe that's NIMBY sort of thinking, but that's NIMBY sort of thinking that at least the handful of people that I had a chance to speak to, and I'm sure I could have gotten many more, it's just I only had so much time. But there are a number of people who have concern about having a rooming house in their neighborhood. The basic principle of being, does it lift the neighborhood or does it suppress the neighborhood? I had an interesting conversation with one gentleman who had lived in his home for the last 30-plus years, and he said, you know, the neighborhood's just now getting nice. He was very concerned about this. Spoke with another resident who was very concerned about their children who walk from their home to Flying Pig in downtown. They're concerned about walking past a rooming house. I guess my basic concern is about the precedent that might set if we're going to be seeing more rooming houses, and if this is the best thing for this neighborhood, if it helps the neighborhood or if it hurts. Thank you for your time.
Do we have any other persons wishing to come forward and speak on item 4B? Third and final call. Please approach the podium and state your name and address.
Matt Finnegan, 2212 Millview Drive, and obviously I'm in favor of it. Well, I can understand people's concerns. However, that's why my manager is going to be here. It's going to be an on-site managed place. It's not going to be as it had been in the past. It had been a rooming house in the past. Part of the challenge with that building is it's very large. It has really no yard whatsoever and that kind of thing. We're finding there is a market for what we're looking for, or looking to do. There's a very good possibility that it could even be an offshoot. I serve on a school board at Rock County Christian. One of the issues we're having is finding enough sponsor families for the number of foreign exchange students that we have. Terry Bale, the manager, is a motherly type person, and that would be as a possibility that they could be utilized that way. Well run, we're going to provide not just beds and dressers. We're going to put in the TVs. We're going to put in Wi-Fi. I'm going to put in cable TV. My granddaughter is just turned 18, and that's the kind of thing she said I'd love to rent, and it would work out well that way. I did agree with. I couldn't speak at the Planning Commission because I serve on it. In fact, I wasn't even in the room, so I couldn't speak to any of the conditions at that time either. And so, I guess I would actually have no problems whatsoever with the signage. We didn't want to call attention to the place, number one. Number two, a little bit as far as the parking situation goes, I should have done a better job of reviewing it, and I think they passed out a really fuzzy looking thing that I took a picture of the 80 scale up there, and there's actually plenty of space on the property for the parking that's being asked for. The biggest issue actually is the curb cut is not on that property. So my proposal in that situation was going to be to actually do a deeded egress so that it would be the property infinitum that have the right to access those parking spots. And finally, I guess my last concern had to do with the sunset clause, so to speak, on if I did sell the property. Because here, one of the ideas here is that if we get this thing and prove that it's a workable model, actually the lady that's going to be managing it for me would like to make it an owner-occup, hoping to work with her. And so if I transfer it, she'd have to come back through the whole process, in probably less than a year. I'm thinking that there's a good chance that we get it up and running if so approved. I would still be involved because most likely it wouldn't be an outright buy. But anyway, so I was hoping to get that taken off of there. Plus, I'm going to be building and redoing the place in that fashion, which would mean we'd be eliminating a main kitchen area. We'd have in the lower level would have 2 community rooms. It would be, the whole structure would be set up differently to operate it that way, and then turn around and not being able to utilize it in the future like that. I guess I always thought the conditional use would allow for it to be taken away from whomever was the owner is, if they're not doing the job. And so I was hoping that if you guys would take a look at removing that requirement. I have no intention of selling the place anytime soon. Plus, I'm going to be using, I have a city loan on the property, so it actually maybe even by redoing it in that way would actually weaken the payback ability of that. I mean, that's kind of the way I would look at the overall thing. I own the property next door, the Voss building, which you completely redid. I mean, we're getting $1,000 a month per floor for that place. I mean, it is beautiful. I wish I could have bring you all through there. And that's the kind of place we want to run next door. I just recently re-rented the lower unit. I told them, the people that were coming in there, what I was looking at doing next door. They had no problem whatsoever with it, thought it was a great idea. And then I've got, I'm available for any other questions.
Do we have any other persons wishing to come forward and speak on item 4B? Second call for persons to come forward and speak on item 4B.
Good evening.
Your name and address?
My name is Terry Bale. I currently reside at 622 East Grand, Apartment A, and I will be the on-site manager, as Matt discussed. Future owner, be a nice little retirement fund for me. I would like to, I was quite alarmed that the neighbors were a little alarmed. I am a little crestfallen to hear it's not going to be a house your children are going to be, you're going to be feared for them to walk in front of. I insist on that now. I will be living there. I have 15 years CNA experience behind me as a caretaker. I still have elderly women in their homes. My son might be one of the boarders. Once he comes back from South Korea, he's a teacher there. It's going to be a very well-run establishment. As far as a precedence, the kind gentleman, my new neighbor, did say that this is a needed commodity. He did admit that this may be a need, either for elderly women, students, almost anybody in this day and age might want to unload their home and just live quietly in a room with Terry Lynn Bale. They're out there. So I just want to insist on that this will be run with in Beloit style, open door policy. So there won't be need for, it's not going to be a rehab facility in any way, shape, or form. So I'm excited, and I hope you look at it in my way as a exciting new opportunity for Beloit and a nice, comfortable home for not only myself, but for other people. Thank you.
Do we have any other persons wishing to come forward and speak on item 4B? Second call. Any other persons wishing to come forward and speak on item 4B? Third and final call for persons to come forward and speak on item 4B. Hearing none, I'll close the public hearing on item 4B, and I'll entertain a motion to get this on the table.
Motion. I'll second.
Moved by Lupke, seconded by DeForest. Councilor Lupke.
Thank you. I'd like to ask my fellow councilors not to prejudge this. I've got to disagree with my good friend Rick. I've gone by that corner for many, many years, as long as I've been in Beloit, and to my best knowledge, that's been an apartment house before, and ironically, you could have an apartment in there, or 2 apartments with maybe 10, 12 people. Now we're limiting it to a landlord who's there, a caretaker, 1 person per apartment, or per room, and with somebody actually in charge who's right there on site. like a dead mother or whatever, for lack of a better word. But I also have respect for Mr. Finnegan's reputation, and I know that he will do all he can to keep this property up. It's a very busy intersection, and it's extremely busy, and people are walking through there all the time, and it's not a place for crime or for somebody to be jumped or whatever, because they cross the street there if they can get across, because it's so busy, and there's that nice park across the street, but there's also, well, down further, Reverend's church is down there, Emmanuel Baptist. Next door, Matt was talking about the Boss Agency. That parking lot is huge back there, because when it used to be a real estate office, there was parking for maybe a dozen cars, right, Matt? So I imagine they're going to share about 3 or 4 of those spaces for the apartment that abuts it. So the parking should be no problem. There are also numerous apartments on Central where Blake College students have lived. Again, in an apartment, you don't always limit the number of people in an apartment. So if you had 2 apartments in there, as you've had before, you could get maybe 8 or 10 people in there. Family, or a guy could invite some friends, or a gal, or whatever. We have now limited this, plus the caretaker on site. I just put down a number of positives. As far as rooming houses or houses like this throughout the city, we will look at this case by case. And again, if the conditions aren't such, but in this case, I think this would be an ideal location. I would not have a problem with my kids walking through there or whatever. It's too busy for anything to happen, and if it could happen, you don't know where the perpetrator would come from, but I don't think it would come from this house. But again, I think it's a positive addition, a rooming house. It's positive with good structure, it's been well thought out, and I think this puts pressure on Mr. Finnegan to even keep a better property than one might expect. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Madam Vice President.
Thank you. I am concerned about NIMBY in this case, and I don't appreciate the assumption about who would stay in the rooms here at this rooming house. We're talking about 5 people. That's a pretty small number of people with an on-site manager. I wish we had apartment buildings that had that kind of ratio, honestly. So I just want to express my concern that we don't yield to prejudged, preconceived stereotypes about who would use a rooming house. I would like to make sure to point out I was able to attend the Plan Commission where this was on the agenda and listen to the discussion about it. And the neighbor who raised concern about a rooming house, his primary concern was just about the supervision and the maintenance of the facility. And when there was discussion about who would be providing that maintenance and who would ensure there was some supervision, that neighbor felt comfortable with Mr. Finnegan, which is why the condition that's listed in the CUP list of conditions was included, and that neighbor was satisfied with that. I was pleased to see there was compromise there, that the Plan Commission considered the neighbor's concern and worked to address their concern that if the property changed hands, that the CUP could be revisited. And then finally, I think I just want to point out that condition number 10 is a very important one, that if the city staff or city officials, elected or appointed, receive any complaints or concerns, the staff has the right to review the conditions and to revisit this. So, I think we have enough safety guards in place that I feel very comfortable that this location makes good sense. For a rooming house, I think we run into more difficulties if we allow it to be vacant, and it will continue to deteriorate even more if it's not used. So, thank you.
Right. Any other questions or comments? Councilor Kelly.
All right, well, I actually don't think it's a great idea. I mean, I know you're all making good points, but I know that it's not a residential neighborhood by zoning, but it's really pretty residential. I mean, there's a doctor's office, but the other things were used as offices were really residents at one time. So we're hoping to be more residential than commercial. And having a rooming house, I don't think it'll add to the neighborhood. Now, I know Matt's a nice guy, and maybe it'd be great, and I'm thinking that I'm probably on the minority here. And when you say number 11, as far as being, was it 10? No, 10. Mm-hmm. Number 10, things that are fine. Like, as long as you mow your lawn, you're in compliance. As long as you're, there's a lot of things that are in compliance and do not add to the neighborhood. So there's things that you can barbecue on your front porch and leave all your toys out, and really you might not be in compliance. You might be in compliance, but it doesn't add to the neighborhood. And so that's really, it sounds great, but it's really not. I'm just worried about, this is the way you come into Beloit. That's the way we always come in. Really nice if it was a nice place to look at. I didn't see any landscape ordinance requirements, and I know maybe that's too much, but it'd be really, if it's gonna be something there, it needs to add to the neighborhood. I can't have it just because we can rent it and there's a need, doesn't need to go on in a neighborhood. And I still think that's a neighborhood, even though you think it's busy. It might have been a rooming house, but it's been really quiet lately there. It's been kind of nice that it's been empty. It used to be kind of messy and it's been nice that it's been just quiet in that corner. So that's kind of.
Is that what you had to say? Okay.
Go ahead.
All right, Councilor Kincaid.
I don't share some of the enthusiasm either for this project. I have a kind of maybe a simplistic view on what's a good thing to do in terms of planning and zoning, and that is, if a proposal adds value to the neighborhood, let's go for it. If it doesn't add value, there could be a problem. I think in this instance, I don't see how the rooming house adds value to the neighborhood. And I describe the neighborhood not going beyond the 150 feet required for notice for a public hearing. The neighborhood is a much larger area than that. And certainly some folks that have signed a petition and who've testified and so forth are a little further afield, but certainly within easy walking distance. My take on the neighborhood is that when we look up Central, it's virtually all residential. There may be one building with an office in it as well. There's one building with a doctor's office, but it's all duplexes and single family. And there is commercial zoning, but as far as I know, there are no actual commercial uses right now. And I suppose this is a good place to have a rooming house because rooming houses aren't allowed in residential areas, as I understand, but they can be as a special use or conditional use in a commercial area. It doesn't seem to make sense to me that to control it in an area that's predominantly, in my view, residential. If we can control it in office or commercial, we certainly ought to presume we could control it in residential. Not that I'm advocating it, but I'm just saying that with respect to the impact on the neighborhood, I think is basically the same. I don't see it as being a positive thing. I think we could all pick at some of the details of the petition, but I think to me the larger picture is this something that is right by the owners, the existing owners, the single-family owners, the residents of the duplexes, and the rest of the Central. Is it really the right thing for us? I don't see it.
Okay. Thank you. Councilor Forrest.
Thank you. Try to choose my words very carefully and diplomatically here. I feel like we are bordering on being discriminatory because our concerns about this CUP center around the type of people that we think would live there. And I think that people that are single, that don't have the need for a whole house, or people who might be lower middle class and can't afford a very large apartment, have just as a right to good quality housing that Mr. Finnegan will provide. I don't think we can make assumptions about their character or their contribution to the neighborhood, or that they deserve to have any less of a quality neighborhood. So I'm trying to choose my words carefully, but I'm a little concerned. Thank you.
Councilor Hendricks.
Oh, Sheila got to it before I did, thank goodness. I agree. Matt, is there a selection process that you've already put into place? Just as far as tenants go, I know I've heard that we don't know who's going to be property, we don't know who's going to be occupying the space. Is there some type of, just to let everyone know? Yes, please, thank you.
In fact, I would use my normal screening process. We do background checks, we do CCAP checks, we look to make sure people haven't been causing problems anyplace else, those kind of things, number one. I would say my biggest marking area is probably college. I think there's a lot of Beloit college students that would come in, that comes in very handy. It would be a very good place for students to live. Plus, we can be a little picky because we actually have a lady living in it that's actually her home as well. So you can run things a little bit tighter ship that way. I mean, if you want, I can turn around and turn that into a multi-unit if that's what you would like. But I'm telling you that you look at the whole layout of the place. There's no yard for a family to be playing in other than in the front yard. I mean, that's really what it is. It's a C1 district. That's why I'm asking for it. I bought both of those properties because I knew they had to go together. And originally, I was going to try and get zoning changed to C2 and try to turn it into like a second-hand shop and that kind of thing. But frankly, I had a heck of a time trying to get people to sign along. Otherwise, it was going to be spot zoning. That was my original plan. In fact, Terry was going to try to run a second-hand shop out of the place at that point in time. It wouldn't work. I couldn't get the zoning change. So I'm looking at that. I'm looking at a chance to not just fulfill a need, but I have many. I mean, I can tell you right now, I can probably have that place rented in a week. I mean, to good quality people that need a nice place to live. They're going to be $400 to $500 a month. We're going to provide the sheets, the towels. I mean, we're going to run this place as if it's our own home, and it's not. So there's going to be some supervision that you're not going to get in any other kind of residential thing. Just for a correction, I also own other buildings on that street. There's no single family. Those are duplexes all the way along there, and I don't know. I didn't see the names on the petition, but if you didn't go up and down that block and get complaints from those people, I'm kind of wondering how far you went to get the possibility of a problem. So that's all I'm saying. We are going to be screening. I'm going to screen like I always do. I very rarely, and you can talk to any of the housing people around, I very rarely have a problem with my residents. If there's a problem, they're gone. I don't play games like that. It's just that simple.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
No, I think I'd like to weigh in at this particular time. Personally, in some ways, I'm ambivalent. However, I do know 3 people who right now rent rooms in other people's houses. So there is a market for this. There are people out there that need this service and are doing it kind of on a sublet basis. One thing that's in common about all of them is that the 3 that I know is that a situation like this where there's a little bit of supervision and things are taken care of for them would be highly advantageous for their lifestyle. I have but one of the main reservations that's handled for me is the sunset provision. That makes it reasonably palatable for me. Also knowing Matt well, I think he has the ability to do this. There are duplexes in the area, and I think it's a reasonable argument that there'll be fewer occupants of this building as a rooming house than there will be as two-family, as a duplex. So I honestly, I think I'm not going to succumb to fear on this one. I have reservations, but I think that they're adequately handled by the structure that's put in place by the conditional use permit, especially the sunset provision, so we get a chance to look at this again. That's my thoughts on the whole thing. Do we have any other questions or comments? Councilor Kelly?
So, if I'm gauging this correctly, it looks like most people are for it. So I would like to know if there's anything that could be added to this conditions.
Or do you have something in mind?
I'm talking about a little landscaping.
That's an idea.
Come on.
Where there's not
Well,
much space
I
here.
know there's nothing here, and plan did not ask for any official landscaping, but I think that's a very prominent corner. It would be really nice if it looked nicer.
Okay, so am I
Yeah.
understanding that you would like to go through a standard architectural review process?
Yeah.
Thank you. Madam Director, do you have any idea on that? Do you have an opinion?
She can't talk.
She doesn't have a voice.
Okay.
She's cold. Is there sufficient space to incorporate landscaping?
Yeah, it's all in front yard.
I mean, you can require landscaping. I mean, but it would be helpful if you had some guidance on what kind of landscaping you're thinking of, if it's just on the corner, where are you wanting this landscaping to go? It would be helpful in terms of if you're going to add a condition.
Well, do I have to decide that right now? Do we have to decide that right now?
If it's
Put a little vague.
If it's a condition of approval, it would be helpful if it was explicit so that we can enforce it.
Well, Julie, would we simply stating that it had to go through the typical commercial architectural and landscape review?
You only need landscaping if you have parking stalls along a street. So there would not be landscaping required just because it's commercial.
Okay, all right. So
That
we
would
would
be
have
the
to be
normal
specific.
process, yeah.
We would have to be specific, huh?
I think that might be presumptuous at this stage, personally. Councilor Kincaid?
Well, we can't do a landscape plan on the back of an envelope here. And if there's to be any landscaping, we need to figure out a way to require it. And it seems to me that with the senior staff we have here, we should be able to figure out a way to do it. We can put little dots on a map and say, put trees there or something, but we can't do it. And I think a practical and reasoned recommendation. I think we should be doing that.
Councilor DeForest.
Could a compromise be that we give staff authority with the landlord to incorporate some landscaping on the property and leave it that vague, or is that not going to fly? With
Madam City Attorney.
the property owner, sorry.
The issue with condition that vague is you have to accept what happens, and if staff determines that X amount of bushes or whatever is acceptable to staff, then that's the result you're going to get. So the more vague you leave the condition, the more open to it for interpretation that condition becomes.
I trust Julie's judgment. I mean, I think she knows that we're just I mean, any landscaping would be an improvement on what's there, and so would that make you happy? Matt has his hand up. Maybe we should ask the property owner. I don't know.
We got Matt over there, so.
All right.
Is that appropriate to ask?
Well, I think that the decision ultimately is ours. I don't know, me personally, obviously I'm in favor of landscaping. One only has to drive by 5th and Portland to see that. But on the other hand, I don't know. It strikes me that it's difficult. At this point, we would probably. I don't know. I'm uncomfortable with something being too vague, but at the same time, I don't know what, I suppose I don't know exactly what's there at this time. It's probably just grass.
Yeah. Just grass, nothing.
Certainly not much space to work with, but.
Just a
Yeah,
little-
as long as if that's maintained, that way, if the building's maintained and it has grass, that would probably not be horrible. It's close, it's right across from Mechanics Green anyway. I don't know, I think it's not a bad idea, maybe we should have thought about this before, but no, I don't know, at this point, I don't think I would add that would be in favor of adding that as a condition.
Well,
Would you like to make that motion and see if you get a second?
yes, I would.
Well, so you're gonna have to be precise, what do you want to say?
I would like to make a motion that we add a condition that some additional landscaping is done in the front of the house, and that the owner works with Julie to determine something nice, and I would guarantee, and I would.
At staff's discretion?
Yeah,
Okay.
at staff's discretion, so it doesn't, I mean, there's nothing there now.
Okay.
So,
I'll second it.
Right, is that, Madam City Attorney, is that clear enough for you?
clear enough?
The wording of the motion could be that the homeowner or the property owner work with community development to establish some landscaping that would be acceptable to staff.
Okay.
I hate to, I mean, Mr. Finnegan has not even been asked what his intentions are with regard to landscaping, so I don't know if.
But, can I say something? Can I say
Go ahead, Meg.
Well, I know that Matt will do whatever the city tells him to do. So therefore, if they tell him to do landscaping, he will do landscaping. Is that not correct?
Okay. All right, Councilor Kincaid.
We've said a lot of nice things about Mr. Finnegan, and I believe all of them, and I think he's a man of generosity, and he wants to do the right thing on that property. I would hope that through his high level of cooperation and the staff's mission to get a good a property that adds value to the neighborhood to the extent that it can, I support that. I think we should be able to figure out a way to do it, and it's not too late to do it right. I mean, we are, and so let's just do it.
All right. So we have a motion, a second, and I believe the language of that motion is, do you have it written down through?
Are you making?
I'm not making, I can't make a motion.
Or do you want what?
I'm trying to get the city attorney's clarification that she understands what we're talking about.
That the property owner work with community development to establish landscaping on the property that would be sufficient for staff's approval.
Okay.
I accept that as the wording to go on.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Councilor DeForest, do you have something to say about that motion?
Thank you. Can I request that Mr. Finnegan be allowed to share his feedback about that?
Okay, yes, please, Matt. Now that we have something for you to comment on.
Well, you can do it that way, but how about give me a shot in some landscaping and start with, we've gotten rid of a whole bunch of trees that were sitting in the front. I got one more to go down, this big ugly thing sitting there right now. I'm waiting for Popons to get over there and take it out. I took out some bushes that are in front, and now it's time to put back. We actually have plans. Terry loves flowers. She loves doing that kind of thing. And so, I mean, how about give us a shot to do our own landscaping and, not, I mean, if you trust me to run the building, how about you trust me to make it look nice there too? It's one of those things, you sit at that stoplight or stop sign, you're going to take a left or a right, you're looking right at that building. I want it to look nice too. I mean, that's part of the appeal. It's going to be part of the marketing. I mean, you got some nasty looking thing sitting there, who's going to be attracted to that? So we do have plans of doing that. I just don't have the specifics in front. In fact, my brother, he knows how to do that stuff better than me. If I figured I'd ask him, so.
Sure. Okay.
Give me a shot.
All right, Councilor Kincaid, you had an additional comment?
Yes. Perhaps when Mr. Finnegan is working on a landscape plan to help maintain the values, he might also consider the property immediately adjacent to it with with the large sign Voss, which has been on that the back part of it for many, as long as I've lived in Beloit, and that's not that long, 9 years or so. The backyard is 100%, virtually 100% concrete and asphalt. The front doors of, I'm really talking about the immediate neighborhood in which perhaps some things could be done to add value to the neighborhood. I noticed that, I think that was the property where the two front doors didn't match. Most places where you see duplexes, they have the same front door because it's just kind of, I don't think this was an art, two different kinds. So I would certainly support the notion that the owner can do a lot, and I would hope that there's some way in which the city council might persuade him to do that.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Will you take that as an amendment?
Well,
We
okay.
need a second first to Anna's revised motion.
Councilor
Okay.
Luque seconded it. Okay, all right, so we have a motion for the amendment. Any other comments and questions on that? All right, hearing none, I'll go ahead and call the matter. All in favor of the amendment to amended motion, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Item one nay. Okay, so we have 6 in favor, and Councilor Sloniker was opposed to the amendment. And
Call the merits.
it's time for us to go ahead and finish this up. All in favor of the amended conditional use permit, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Councilor Sloniker, were you in favor of the amendment? Okay, all right, so that passes 7-0. Thank you. All right, now that we've gotten that one talked to death, let's go ahead and move on to item 4C.
A public hearing to solicit input on the community development, housing, and homeless needs in the city for inclusion in the 2016 Annual Action Plan and resolution approving 2016 Community Development Block Grant local funding priorities.
All right, let's move on to this one. Thank you, Mrs. Christensen.
Okay, so this is your regularly scheduled time where we seek public input on public housing, community development, homeless, and housing needs as we go to prepare our annual action plan, which makes us eligible to apply for our block grant funding. But the resolution on your agenda, when we took to CDA the last several years the idea of doing funding priorities, which they had rejected. But this year, we did convince them that it would be a good idea that would help to make decisions at both the CDA and the council level. So we wanted you to have these together so that they could give input on the plan, and they could also give input on those funding priorities as well. And the funding priorities that were recommended by staff were approved by CDA, and they were based on what came out of our consolidated planning process from last year. There was a meeting on housing and homelessness needs, non-homeless special needs, community and economic development needs, and based on what we saw out of those meetings, we came up with the funding priorities, which were on the resolution, which is before you tonight, which includes public service programs, which focus on comprehensive case management strategies, with priority given to neighborhood stabilization activities, education and budgeting and life skills, and employment training that corresponds with local employment opportunities, because those things were specifically identified as part of that plan process. There was a thought that if we could actually find an agency who would provide training for all these new jobs that we're seeing through the Gateway development, that would be very helpful for the current residents and helping them get jobs in our city. And then the other funding priorities are code enforcement, housing rehabilitation, economic development activities with priority given to technical job training, program administration, and then fair housing. And then CDA did unanimously recommend those funding priorities. And if approved by council, they would then be incorporated into the application itself that will go out later this month. And so people would have to respond as to which funding priority they meet. And as it kind of goes through the process, then hopefully that's what we would actually budget, is funds that met those local funding priorities. And with us, you know, as you know, for those of you who have been on council a while, we've seen reduced funding over the years for CDBG. So I think it is important that we kind of focus ourselves, especially when you have a 15% public service cap, which ends up being, you know, usually around $100,000, and we usually have about $250,000 in AS. So I think it's helpful for staff in the CDAs. They're making the recommendation if they know kind of the perspective that council's coming from, and that there are funding priorities established. And I know Sheila DeForest has argued for that since the day she came on council, or maybe before she came on council, when she was on CDA. And so I know we'd like to get back to that so that we can be a little bit more focused. HUD looks at our programs, like when they look at our code enforcement program, they look to see if we have a plan for that, which we do have a plan for code enforcement and housing rehab, but we don't really have a plan for how we do public service. So I think it's a good thing for us to set funding priorities for this next funding cycle.
Thank you. I'd like to open the public hearing on item 4C. Anyone wishing to come forward and speak on item 4C, please approach the podium and state your name and address.
Greetings and salutations. Mark Perry with Community Action, 20 Eclipse Center.
And I'm Lynn Valberg with Community Action, also 20 Eclipse Center.
First of all, I'd like to say that I'm really pleased to hear that the CDA is setting funding priorities, and those funding priorities are focusing especially on job training skills, financial literacy, hopefully some life skills education. The area that we do some really wonderful programming in this community for our youth and for some of our adults, but there is a gap in services. That gap exists with served populations of both youth and adults. First, to start with our youth. I don't know if you know this, but 37% of all the youth that live in the city of Beloit live at or below poverty. We need to do something to break that cycle. It starts with promoting continuing education. It starts with job training skills. It starts with financial literacy, to work with those youth and address those youth so that we can break that cycle of poverty. We have some great prevention programs in this community that do an excellent job of educating those youth who are at low risk. We also the youth who are at high risk, we have our correction programs, but there's a group of youth in the center that prevention programs that currently exist don't serve and are not engaged, that we would desperately like to prevent engaging in corrections. That population does not adequate services. We do not target that medium to high risk youth population well at all in this community. And because that group of youth continue to fall through the cracks, ultimately end up being homeless, being unemployed, and unfortunately incarcerated, and if you're African American and African American male, disproportionately incarcerated in this community. Looking at the funding priorities, I'm hoping that this year we look at those youth and young adult serving organizations that are addressing the issues of the hardest to serve youth and young adult populations, and are addressing the issues of homelessness, addressing the issues of financial literacy, job training and education, because if we don't do that and serve that population, we're going to continue to have some significant issues. Related to that dynamic, of course, is the significant escalation in gun violence among youth and young adults in this community over the past couple of years. Providing access and opportunity for that hardest to serve population will go a long way in greatly reducing that violence in the community. I do that because I don't have. Talking to a group of youth that I mentored this spring before the summer started, what is their biggest hope for the summer? To a kid, these are 16 and 17-year-olds who live in your community, in our community. The biggest concern was making sure they didn't get shot this summer. Their second concern, getting a summer job so they could earn a wage and keep themselves occupied and out of trouble. Providing opportunities for the hardest to serve populations will prevent that first thing that they're concerned about happening. Providing them with education, providing them with access to job training programs, providing them with summer training, providing them with training throughout the year, and promoting education will keep a lot of these things from happening. We have created a dynamic where we are afraid of this population, and they know that we're afraid of this population. We don't embrace them, we don't invite them, we talk about them as thugs and outsiders and criminals and gangbangers. And because we continue to label them as such, they continue to behave as such. Treat people like rats in a cage or like animals, and they will continue to act that way. I'm hoping that the CDA this year will focus on those organizations that are serving the hardest to serve populations and promoting education and employment and providing housing for that population. There are some wonderful agencies in this community that receive funding from CDBG. Great job. But there are some people in this community who really deserve those resources because we have an opportunity to break the cycle. The problem in Beloit is not so big that we can't get our arms around it, but if we keep ignoring it and keep allowing youth and young adults to fall through the cracks, we're going to continue to have the same problems we've always had. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other persons wishing to come forward and speak on item 4C? Second call for persons to come forward and speak on item 4C. Third and final call for persons to come forward and speak on item 4C. Hearing none, I'll close the public hearing on item 4C. Do we have a motion to approve? Moved by Lubke, second by Sloniker. Questions and comments? Councilor DeForest.
I do have one on, I'm having to really carefully choose my words this evening. I've been on the council now for 7 years, and we did have priorities a while back when I was a CDA and really fought for them, but was still frustrated when many of my colleagues on the CDA still insisted on not following the funding priorities we had identified. So I'm just going to put on my most assertive city councilor hat and say that when the funding proposals come back to this body, I guess a little guidance from the city council to the CDA, I, as one city councilor, expect to see that these priorities are followed. I know this is tough decisions. We have some agencies that have become accustomed to receiving funding for many, many years and are doing great work, but I really feel like we have the opportunity to really maximize our resources here instead of spreading a little bit across a lot of agencies. So I just would like to just provide that guidance, I suppose, for lack of a better word, to the CDA to be thoughtful about making those tough decisions, or, you know, we'll have to have some pretty tough discussion when it gets to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other councilor questions or comments? Oh, Madam City Manager. Okay, where is it? Go ahead.
I will attempt. As you can tell, I'm losing my voice. I think it's evident to everyone sitting around the horn, but for me in particular, hearing the comments made about concerns that are the highest priority from one particular agency's perspective, I think it's wonderful that all of those concerns are reflected in these priorities, and most of which are reflected in the first priority that's listed, that includes that comprehensive look at providing education for job training, but that includes some financial and life skills that may be necessary first. Coming here from a variety of other different jurisdictions, I certainly have seen that to be the case in many urban settings, and I think having a breadth of services that can address all of those needs to get as many individuals in our community job ready, and that may be individuals coming in at different areas along that path. They may not all be at the same place, and being able to have a variety of services depending upon where each person is, I think is a great advantage to the city of Beloit. So I know there will always be limited funds and greater need, but by prioritizing where those dollars will be spent, I think we do have an opportunity to have the greatest impact. And so I am encouraged and looking forward to this year's application.
Thank you. All right then. Well, I'll go ahead and call the matter. All in favor of approval of the resolution, say aye. 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 Any opposed? Item passes 7-0. And finally, we get to item 5. All right. We have reached a meeting where members of the public can speak to the council about issues before us or may come before us in the future. The council will not any events or cannot act on any of, but unless the item you were speaking about already appears on our agenda. But we may act on requests at a future meeting or refer the speaker to staff for assistance. We ask that you hold your comments to 3 minutes or less and avoid making personal attacks. All right. Do we have any other individuals wishing to come forward and speak under citizens' participation? Please approach the podium, state your name, address.
Good evening. My name is reside at 751 Euclid Avenue. Madam Manager, welcome to Beloit. President, members of the council, Madam Attorney. I'm referring to item C on the consent agenda, which is a resolution for the move to amend to go before the citizens of Beloit. Just a little bit of background. I appreciate the opportunity to speak on the public record on this. Move to amend has been in existence for a little over 5 years now. We have been successful in gaining the approval of 17 states and over 650 communities across the United States. 59 of those communities are in the state of Wisconsin. Each time this has been voted on in the state of Wisconsin, it has passed. The least amount it has ever passed by is 63%. It's because this isn't a Democratic issue, Republican issue. This is a people's issue. In the 5 years of Move to Amend has been doing this work, you have not one time heard Move to Amend mentioned on NBC, CBS, or ABC News. First and foremost, because these organizations are not news organizations, they are corporations whose primary purpose is to generate profit. Much of their profit comes from Wall Street, but a large percentage of their revenue comes from advertising in political campaigns. So they will not give one word of support to what this people's movement is looking to do. This all began 226 years ago with 3 words by our founding fathers when they put together and ratified the United States Constitution. I don't think it was the first draft. When they started that document with "we, the people," that's who they intended to have the power of governance in this democracy that we call the United States of America. We look to have this not passed by this board, though I know a number of you have signed the petition. What I look for is for you to pass this on to the citizens of this community. Allow the voters' voice to be heard on this. Most people aren't aware of this, but when this Constitution was ratified in 1789, about 5% of the people were protected, had their rights protected by this document. You had to be a white, adult, male, and a property owner, have some significant wealth. The history of this country is little more than a series of struggles by individuals and different groups of people to gain recognition of legal personhood status that not only grants them the ability for their rights to be recognized by the United States Constitution, but more importantly, to be protected by it. Anytime there's a legal discussion, you always look for precedents. We have a founding document that actually has precedents. It is our Declaration of Independence, where it clearly states that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. I think it's insulting that those rights have been passed on not beyond what God created, but passed on to what man has created. Last I checked, God didn't create any corporations, unions, nonprofits, or associations. This resolution has 2 components, and this is my closing remarks. The first of which is that only human beings, not corporations, unions, nonprofits, or similar associations, are entitled to constitutional rights. Just people get those. And number 2, money's not speech. It's just property. Controlling and regulating how much money can be spent on politics and political campaigning is not unconstitutional. It is the very right of citizens to say we've had enough of all this insane money corrupting our democracy. I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Do we have any other persons wishing to come forward and speak under citizens' participation? Second call for persons to come forward and speak under citizens' participation. Third and final call for persons to come forward and speak under citizens' participation. Hearing none, I'll close citizens' participation and we'll move on to the consent agenda. And maybe I can get through this without stumbling. All items listed under the consent agenda are considered routine and will be enacted by one motion. There'll be no separate discussion unless a council member so requests, in which event the item will be removed from the general order of business and considered at this point on the agenda. Do we have a councilor who wishes anything on the agenda? Councilor Forrest.
Item 6C, please.
All right. Any other councilors wishing something removed from the consent agenda? Hearing none, the consent agenda will consist of 6A and 6B and 6D and E. Do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So
Moved by Lubke, second by Sloniker. All in favor of approval of the consent agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Consent agenda passes by a vote of 7-0. Item 6C.
Is a resolution placing advisory referendum question on the April 5th, 2016 ballot.
All right, thank you. Councilor DeForest, did you have something you want to say?
Thank you. Yes, I do have a question. Ms. Stotler, with this referendum question, will your office, what efforts will be made by your office to educate the voters about what the question means?
We're required by law to publish a Type C notice.
Okay.
I think it's 10 to 12 days before the election. And the explanation of a yes vote and no vote is included in that notice, a legal requirement. I would assume the Move to Amend group will have plenty of efforts out there, but legally it's our duty to publish the notices prior to the election, just stating the question and the impact of the question.
Is it published only through the Beloit Daily News, or do we also publish in the State Line News, which is a free paper?
Notices go to our official newspaper only, but we could include those to the media release as well.
Could I request that that be done? Okay, I would like to request that notice also be included in the State Line News because it is a free newspaper with wide readership.
I just need to point out that I can send those notices, but they are not obligated to print.
Of course, they're at discretion. Thank you.
Right. Do I have a motion to approve item 6C?
Motion. Second.
Moved by Lubke, second by Kincaid. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, I'll call the matter. All in favor of 6C, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Item passes 7-0. Item 7 would be ordinances. We have none. Item 8 is appointments. We also have none at this time. Councilor, upcoming events and activities is number 9, and we will start with Councilor Hendricks.
And I will keep it brief, but
Thank you.
I did attend, I know I spoke about it at the last meeting, back to Beloit, American Homecoming, and they coerced me into singing the Back to Beloit song, so I had to refresh. But we did do that, and they want me to record it, so hopefully maybe you guys will hear it at some point. And then Summer Gospel Jam, our first annual Summer Gospel Jam was a huge success. The rain held out until after our feature choir was leaving the stage, which was awesome. And then, so people have already been asking year 2, and we're like, so we'll see. But we did get a lot of good feedback on Summer Gospel Jam, so there more than likely will be a year 2. Movie on the lawn, on the big lawn. I went to see the Lego movie with my daughter and my nephews, and they loved it. The bugs didn't bite too much last Thursday, and there was a huge turnout. The kids were running around. Some were watching, some were singing along, so that's always a good community event. And then the fireworks. We were there. I didn't go to Riverside. I didn't go. There were lots of people down there. I saw a lot of cars in the Eclipse parking lot. I kept going. I watched from Park and Randall. I know there were some issues there, supposed issues there, but there were none. I was on the scene. No issues. Fireworks. No shots. But it was, again, a great turnout, and beautiful fireworks. That's it.
All right, thank you.
And my birthday was yesterday, so the world was celebrating the coming of the greatest day, July 5th.
All right, that's great. Well, I'm glad it was that good of a day for you.
Yes.
All right, Councilor Sloniker.
Yes, I had a chance to go to the golf committee meeting, the POG meeting, which is the Porter Avenue Watch Group, the Police and Fire Commission, Equal Opportunities Commission, and a strategic planning session. And I also got to tour the Kura Haskell golf course. And then I also went to the Biff event with the movie on the lawn. That was really nice. Nice event for the community. And then on the 4th, there was a big picnic at Vernon Park. So one of the churches here in Beloit puts on a picnic every year. So that's about it.
Yeah.
And then, sorry. I'm looking forward to touring all the parks here in Beloit, July 8th.
All right, Councilor Kelly.
All right, well, I had already forgotten everything I did, but Regina reminded me that I looked at my book, that I did go to the Gospel Fest, and it was very good. I made the mistake of sitting all the way up front, and I could feel the music. I felt like it was just boom, boom. Just good. I can't explain it. It was like
that was your soul, man.
My soul trying to come out. So I left right when the rain was starting to get there, but it was perfect because had it been sunny, it would have been awful out there. It was just overcast enough that it was pleasant to be there all day. We volunteered, so we got some nice shirts for keeps. What else did I do? Oh yes, I went to a Snappers ball game on Friday night. I don't think I'd ever been to a Snappers game where they had the fireworks. And they had very nice fireworks. I guess they're having fireworks next Friday again, so if anybody would like to go, they do it to music and everything. It's really nice. And I will be going to the parts tour next Wednesday, so we're signed up and ready to go. What else did I forget? Oh.
Okay. Councilor Lukey.
I'll keep this brief. I want to hear our audit, and I want to hear from Nick and his crew, so little hint there. I was lucky to go with our city manager to an event for O.V. Schaefer, Beloit's iconic former Beloit College professor, who's 87 now, but he's created over 1,000 pieces throughout the country, and many in Wisconsin, many in this area. And I also went to an exhibit at the Beloit Fine Arts Incubator on Friday night, which is fantastic. His pieces were on display there. But another Beloit product, O.V. Schaefer, and they're doing a bus tour around Wisconsin to see some of his works, a 2-day tour. Also, it's great to be down at Harry's place on Friday night. I guarantee you there are no mosquitoes down there. It's a beautiful night, and it's wonderful to see all these people from Rockford and Janesville and South Beloit and other areas coming to Beloit to have fun. Says a lot about our community, and the music is fantastic. That's all.
All right. Councilor DeForest.
Thank you. I heard the uh-oh, and I'm looking forward to hearing from Nick and our auditors as well. But it's been a very busy 2 weeks. I want to thank Sun Valley for hosting our Strawberry Fest. The proceeds benefited some area organizations, and great turnout as usual. Thank you to all the members of that church that pulled it off. They put in lots and lots of volunteer hours to make that happen, and it's a great community event for the West Side. We don't hear often of lots of community events on the West Side, so I really appreciate them stepping up to do that. I was pleased to attend the Gospel Jam. It was a fantastic turnout for the very first one, and I would like to congratulate Jim Caldwell on receiving a key to the city, which was well earned. And I have to do a special shout out to Alexis Hill. She is a young girl from Beloit who our Beloit officers kind of entrusted to. They were walking through the parking lot, and she directing people. She volunteered to do that. She was out there for several hours assisting the police department, and so I want to appreciate our officers who, you know, engaged our young people, and she was pleased to help. So I was also glad to send her an official thank you letter from the City Council for doing that. I've attended lots of meetings the last 2 weeks. Police and Fire Commission, Plan Commission, the Porter Avenue Watch Group meeting, a county board meeting, and also the breakfast of municipal leaders where the county board president, vice president, the Janesville City Council president meet to talk about ways that we can collaborate and work regionally. I also was pleased to participate in the Beloit podcast this past week. This is a great way that's promoting Beloit and Beloiters, and so I would encourage you to check out the Beloit podcast to see some of those features of some of our Beloiters. And of course, went to Farmers Market. What a great place to be. And finally, last but not least, I have to say I'm thrilled because a group of us have worked so hard on this for many, many years. As you know, the Rock River was designated as a national water trail, which provides incredible promotion for the Rock River and the communities along it. And we feature in the Destinations Travel magazine with some beautiful pictures and talks about the water trail and the great communities that the river runs through. This is nothing but good for Beloit. So I'm so pleased for all those folks who made it possible, and grateful for those advocates of water quality, because certainly people will not want to come to the Rock River if the water quality isn't good. So thank you for all those who continue to advocate for our water, continue for environmental health in our city, and for all those avid canoers and constantly trying to make our portaging safe around our dams. So lots of really fantastic Beloiters doing great work. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Kincaid.
In the interests of brevity, I will just read off 10% of the things I've been doing this past 2 weeks. And so I'll read the first 4, and if you want to know about the balance, just meet me outside and we can just really chat about it. I'll start with yesterday. I cleaned out my garage. My daughter and her husband came over, and very fast, and I can't tell you what a joy it was. I wish all of you had been there. On the night of July 4th, we had just come home from a birthday party and July 4th presentation. We were going to go to the fireworks, but I personally was so full of cake and pie, and I just went home and I listened to the fireworks on Emerson Street, and it was just perfect. Anyone who wants to come over next 4th of July at my house to listen to the fireworks, you're most welcome.
And clean the garage.
And clean the garage. I saw Marilyn over at the golf committee. That was less exciting than some of the other things that I've been doing, but the peak experience there was going around on a cart looking at all the grass and the holes and all that sort of stuff. So I would urge you to do that. Then really the total high point of the weekend and the week is the last 4th thing is, again, the farmers market. If you've been there at least 6 times this year, you've missed a lot. Every single time, so I hope to see you out there. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
That's it. If you want more, remember outside.
And I can't top that, so I'm not going to add anything to this. All right, so item 10 is City Manager's presentation. We'll start with 10A.
It is a presentation on the Hearing Loops program.
Mr. Demasis.
Mr. President, council members, City Manager Luther, very excited to be here tonight on behalf of the Library Board. We have our President, John Watrous. We have one of our other trustees, Nora Gard. Diane Lichtenstein was here earlier as well. Very excited to talk about a new resource service that's being provided at the library. And with me, I have Steve Plotiter. and he is the director of the Arrowhead Library System, the regional library system that is for all the libraries in Rock County, and Lisa Kosmicki, who is the audiologist at Beloit Health System. And what we're going to talk about are these hearing loops, and this is something that I had not heard about until months ago. And this is the universal sign, a stop sign. You have this, and many people know what this stands for. I certainly did not, and I think many people in our community don't, because there are very few locations that have this. And Beloit Public Library is going to be the first really public space to be offering hearing loops. And you can find out more about this yourself, anyone out there, on July 15th at 5:30 at the Beloit Public Library in the meeting room. We're going to have this kickoff event, and Dr. Juliet Sturkins is a national advocate for these hearing loops. And she will be there to talk about them. We'll be there also to demonstrate it. So we welcome anyone that's looking to find out what this new service is, anybody with a hearing impairment that wants to find out how they can be able to avail themselves of this new service. And I've heard from people that it's young, old, anyone that have these kinds of hearing impairments and that can be helped by this and a lot of the library programming that's out there. So how does this work? This looks a lot like our meeting room at the library. And so you have the speaker up there with the microphone, you have the amplifier over the side, you have the people in the crowd. So what this is it's pretty simple technology in terms of understanding it. You have a speaker talking into a microphone. What happens now is if you have a hearing aid, is you don't have depth perception. So you're hearing the noise coming at you, it amplifies it, but you're hearing all the background noise, and you hear the rustling, and you hear all that kind of, the chitter-chatter. What this does is it connects the speaker into the microphone to the ear of the person wearing the hearing aid. And that's about as deep as I'm going to get into this because, as I said, I have an audiologist right behind me. But I wanted to introduce this as far as in the library in the meeting room. And I'll let Lisa talk about a little more specific here.
This is my We're seeing here an example of a telecoil next to the penny and the dime, just to show the size of what we're talking about. This is something that can be worn in one of two ways. It can be installed in a hearing aid selected and installed prior to the purchase. Or there's a technology called a streamer, which is backwards compatible with many hearing aids that are already in use, which is a wonderful way for people to take advantage of this who may already have hearing aids that maybe didn't plan for a teleloop or have a telecoil installed in their hearing aid. And this, a person would simply wear this, press the button on the side, and the beauty of it is all of the sound and the reverberation in the room is overcome because the signal is going directly from the sound system through the streamer up to the patient's hearing aid. This is an example of where one might access a telecoil on their hearing aids. They can be housed in either a behind-the-ear hearing aid or an in-the-ear hearing aid, or a streamer can be used. And these are some examples of hearing aids, and you can see they come in all different shapes and styles and sizes, and with some planning, a patient can decide to have a telecoil or a streamer and access that technology.
Well, we've had this project, and it's a result of a grant, and I'll let Steve talk about the grant. But what we've had in the library, it's a two-phased project. And the first phase was putting a hearing loop at the reference desk and at the circulation desk. So if anyone can come up and ask a question, they don't have to shout it. They can actually connect in here and have a normal, a volume conversation. So this is that box on the table there. You can see it here as well. And you can see the box there with the symbol on it. And this is it being installed at the reference and the circulation desks at the library. And so we've had those devices for about a year. There's also a headphone that you can put on if you just want it amplified, the sound amplified. If you don't have a hearing aid, you can also put those on and it'll be amplified. And then the most recent was the installation of the hearing loop in our meeting room. And so what they did, as you can see from those pictures there, is they pulled up the carpet tile and they laid this loop under the carpet all around the meeting room. And so it's an antenna under the carpet that will connect directly to the microphone. And you can see the loop in the upper left-hand corner. That little golden ribbon on the ground there, that's kind of taped down, and that is the loop that was installed. And then we have the amplifier system and all the other devices that people can take advantage of. Now I'm going to let Steve talk about how this all came about. Just quickly prefacing it by saying that this really is a perfect example of local, regional, state, federal, all working together, and private business as well, really working together to bring this together.
Okay. The project was funded, and as Nate mentioned, it's been kind of in two phases, but each of the phases were funded by what are known as LSTA grants. LSTA stands for Library Service and Technology Act, and the money is federal money, which comes from the Institute of Museum and Library Services. Every year, a certain amount goes to each state to fund various things, and accessibility aids are included on that. So, in 2014, we had a $5,000 grant, and we installed those service desk hearing loops in each one of the 7 Rock County libraries. This year, 2015, we did a $25,000 grant, and in this case, we installed basically meeting room and program room hearing loops in the Beloit, Edgerton, and Janesville public libraries. And we have some partners with this. I already mentioned kind of how the funding works with LSTA, but we also have some local agencies that we've partnered with. One is the Rock County Aging and Disability Resource Center, and then we also have partnered with the Wisconsin School for the Deaf in Delavan. And one of the things the Wisconsin School for the Deaf did was provide materials. Each of the libraries participating in this during the month of March, which is Deaf Awareness March, put up a display of basically materials that the School for the Deaf has available that libraries can get through the school. And we've also, I think all of you should have a brochure that just gives a little description of what we've been doing.
So the brochure you have talks about hearing loops in general, and then you also have the flyer for that event, and I'll show that once again because we really welcome everyone to come to that. And these are the audiology services in Beloit. As I said, Lisa is here, and we've been talking with both her and her colleague Monica, and then a couple of the other audiology services in town, and I've been talking with them, and we'll have further conversations. So this is one more way that the Beloit Public Library is making a great city even greater. You may hear that line over and over, I'm not sure. But the other thing, it's fitting that I added this tonight because we've seen quite a bit of this tonight, making a great democracy even greater. We've heard from a lot of people here tonight, and you've heard a lot of different voices. And that's really key, is that, we all have a voice, you can hear the voices, or the voices, everyone has a voice in a democracy, but if you can't hear what's being said, then you're not able to fully participate in it. And we have a lot of programs and events over there. We have legislators come in, we have city council members, we have the candidate forum for the city manager, and now we have a room, a space, a public space where everybody will be able to come in and participate. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, we'd all be happy to take those.
Councilor DeForest.
Thank you. Do you want to go first? It's okay. You can go first. There's no reference to the streamers in the brochure. How will people who come in who don't have a T-Quay will know that they can get a streamer?
I I think during the kickoff event, they're going to talk about how to have that conversation with who fits you with your hearing aid, how it's already set up, and what can be used to make it compatible with the teleloop system. So we can provide information if that's something that we can bring to the library during that kickoff event. We certainly can have something ready to pass out.
Okay, will the library have a few streamers? Is that something that would be available to folks?
This streamer here, we do not have that right now, and that would be something that we would look into as we move forward on this. We have some of the ones with the amplifiers. As we look at programming and work closely with the audiologists in the area and finding out what kind of programming we can wrap around this. It's one thing to have people come in and be able to participate in the program we already provide. But we're looking beyond that and trying to say what kind of programming can we create that's original that can, for this kind of
Great, thank you.
So, who else? Press the button.
Councilor Kelly.
Okay, so how popular is this technology? I've never heard of it before, and
It's something that's been around for a while, and it's utilized more in Europe than it is here. It is a very effective way, though, to bring people into a conversation. And hearing loss is so isolating, and that's one of the devastating effects of it, is people get cut off from their family, their friends, community events. So to be able to link up and to participate fully is a wonderful way. This is a wonderful way to do it.
so now libraries are getting this. Are there other types of institutions that are installing these?
There are a few churches in Beloit that are looped, and as people go in for services, they can either, again, access the sound system through their hearing aid or through a device like this and hear that way. There are a number of different ways it can be used. It can be used at banks. Tellers could use it, and so there's a lot of opportunity there if this is something that caught on in our community.
That's very cool. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, I just thought of one more thing. Sorry. I know that one creative use of streamers is for translation as well, that can use headphones and a streamer, and then someone else could be translating a different part of the room. I mean, so it might be helpful when the library looks at the possibility of having streamers in the future, that we could have programming that a translator could be whispering translation Spanish, let's say, to people that have headsets. Is that something that maybe you'll consider, or just throw it out there just to put on the back burner to keep in mind?
Yeah, that's exactly the kind of feedback that we want to hear. Okay. Is we don't want this stuff just installed and not just sitting there. So any way that we can try to get it out. Question too about how are people going to know about this after this kickoff event. We're going to be pushing it through the offices of the clients of audiologists and the clinics and that sort of thing, but also the library itself, and in ways that we can grab the attention so people can know they can use this.
Thank you.
All right.
Can I add something real quick?
Sure.
One thing you've seen too, the library world, primarily through the advocacy of Dr. Sturkins, who will be presenting on the 15th, has really taken to putting in hearing loops in libraries, and the library systems have really been pushing this. So you've probably seen about the number of loops in libraries almost quadruple over the last 3 years. So it's something that's really been pushed.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Item 10B.
Finance and Administrative Services Director Eric Miller presenting the 2014 audit report.
Good evening.
Mr. Miller.
Okay, each year Baker Tilly conducts an independent audit report and prepares the comprehensive annual financial report for the City of Beloit. It's a very extensive process that actually begins in December with preliminary field work and continues on typically through the end of June when it's due to several different organizations. With that said, I'd just like to personally thank my Director of Accounting, Don Duvall, and her staff and the entire finance and admin services staff, for all their hard work that they've done in preparation of the audit and, of course, during the audit. And I'd also like to thank Carla Gogan and Brian Swain and their staff for all the hard work that they put in getting this prepared. At this time, I'd just like to introduce Carla Gogan, who's a partner with Baker Tilly, Virchow Krause, to walk you through the audit report. Right hand button.
Great, thank you. Good evening and thank you. I am Carla Gogan, a partner with Baker Tilly, and I was excited to hear that you were excited to talk about the financial audit results tonight. Really, a large goal of mine is simply to answer questions as well. So I will be going through some financial benchmarks and metrics similar to what we've done in the past. I understand that you did have the opportunity to do some pre-budget planning, and so I don't think there will be any surprises tonight. You have a number of documents. One is the presentation that is up on the screen that we'll be going through. All the information contained within here can be found within the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, which for short is referred to as the CAFR. And that is a large bound document for your constituents as well. If it isn't already, it will be provided on the city's website. But this does include all of the financial information. We do a financial audit. We also do a compliance audit. And you do receive a significant amount of grant funding. So as a part of the annual audit process, we are also looking at compliance as it relates to the grant funding that you do receive. A couple of things I do want to highlight within the CAFR itself, and I know you might not have it in front of you, but again, for your reference, on Roman numeral 9. And again, that's something for you to peruse at a later time. What you do hire us to do is provide an audit opinion on your financial statements. These are the city's financial statements. While you do hire us as a convenience to prepare the financial statement document, ultimately these are the city financial statements, and we are providing an opinion on those statements. We have provided an unmodified, or what we refer to as a clean opinion, which is the highest level of assurance you can receive in your financial statements. The other item that I wanted to point out is numeral 12, and that is referred to as the management's discussion and analysis. And again, this is a very difficult, or can be a very difficult document through, and so I would recommend that at a minimum you read the management's discussion and analysis, or the MD&A. That is written by management. It is essentially a prescribed form, meaning it has to include certain content, and we do read that content. We're not providing audit assurance on it, but it does provide a nice overview of the financial highlights of the city over the year. So tonight I'm going to go through different financial benchmarks, and the presentation is really split between looking and focusing on the governmental funds, or the general fund of the city, which is your main operating fund, and then I'll focus some attention on the enterprise funds, or your utility funds. The general fund's revenue sources are largely tax dollars and grant revenues, whereas the enterprise funds that I'll refer to are largely funded through charges for services. When I've been before you in the past, I've mentioned three primary metrics that we take a look at, or this three-legged stool that I've referred to in the past. And we take a look at, as a part of that, capital assets. So what are the condition of the city's capital assets? Your infrastructure, your buildings, your equipment. In this report, I'm not going to focus much attention on that metric, but in terms of looking at the overall financial health of a community, that is a component of looking at that. Another piece of it is the equity, or the fund balance, or the net position of an entity. And again, that's going to be looking at the general fund, your main operating fund. And by net position, or your fund balance, that's taking a look at the assets that you have within that fund, cash, receivables, less obligations of that fund, and what you're left with is fund balance. And I'm going to talk about some metrics related to that. And then third, we're going to talk about some debt service obligations. And that's a third metric that we like to take a look at. So starting off on page 2, as I mentioned, the general fund, which is the main operating fund. Fund balance is what you have. You have assets minus your liabilities, and it's fund balance. It It isn't necessarily an approximation of how much cash you have, because you do have some receivables, you have some payables, but it essentially is it's close to cash. Fund balance is segregated into 3 different categories, and for informational purposes on page 5 of this presentation, if you do have a paper copy in front of you, it describes in more detail these 3 categories, but I'll go through those with you. The first being non-spendable. So this is equity that the city has, but this represents equity that isn't readily liquid. So a few things included in here, and it did increase over the prior year. One thing is inventory. So at the end of the year, the city has public works inventory, salt inventory, and that was up considerably over 2013. And we saw that consistently with a number of our clients where there was excess salt inventory at the end of the year. And so the city is not in a position of liquidating or selling inventory. It's there for its use. And that's why it's an asset, but it's considered a non-spendable asset. Another significant item is related to an advance, and we've talked about this in the past, but an advance that the general fund has made to the golf course. So over the course of a number of years, the general fund has provided funding to the golf course, and that advance did increase over the prior year by about $50,000, and so the advance is approximately $970,000. So that is an asset that is on the balance sheet of the general fund, but it's considered non-spendable because the golf course does not have funds readily available in order to pay that advance back. The assigned fund balance is monies that are assigned for the next year's budget. So again, these are 2014 results that we're talking about. These were monies that were assigned to be used in the 2015 budget process, and now again you're beginning the 2016 budget process. So you have a lot of different years going on. But in this case, these are assignments that you've made as a governing body. And lastly, you have your unassigned fund balance, which unassigned fund balance doesn't have any strings attached to it. So those monies are available for you to use at your discretion. And that brings us to our first benchmark or our metric that we analyze, and that's taking a look at your unassigned general fund fund balance, so those funds that do not have any strings attached, comparing that to the next year's operating budget. So in this case, taking a look at the 2015 operating budget of the general fund. And the city does have a fund balance policy, which should be commended for that. One, it provides guidance to you as a governing body as to what the appropriate benchmark is. It also assists management as well as you're looking at the budget process. And you do have a policy that says at a minimum that you'll have 15% of operating revenues or 3 months of general fund operating expenditures. And you do have just over 3 months of general fund operating expenditures. So you are exceeding the minimum. 15% of operating revenues would be around $4.5 million, $4.8 million. The other metric was the 3 months of general operating expenditures, and you are over that metric. Any questions on fund balance and what this means before I move on to taking a look at your budget to actual results for the year? So if we move down to the bottom of the page, and we're going to discuss this in a bit more detail on page 8. And I should also mention the page numbers that are in the parentheses, that's making reference to the financial statement page numbers. So if you're looking for more information, I would suggest that that's where you would go. In terms of looking at the actual results from 2013 to 2014, very consistent results with the prior year. So that's looking at the results in one way. We're going to take a look at those results from a budget perspective as well. But before we do that, we're going to shift gears a little bit, and we're going to talk about that other leg of the stool where I mentioned was looking at the debt position. So from an equity position, you're meeting your policy. From a debt position, the city, for its projects, infrastructure projects, public works type projects, borrows general obligation debt. And GO debt, or general obligation debt, is secured by the taxing authority of the city. And the city is limited to how much it can borrow to 5% of the equalized value of the city. And we're going to look at a trend graph in just a few moments. It's going to take a look at the trend both of the GO debt over the last 5 years as well as the trend of your GO debt capacity, because I think it really is important. You know, some of of the things I've been talking about so far is really looking at the current year and looking at the prior year. I think it's really important to look at some of the trends, and we're going to do that in just a moment. But you can see from this particular metric, you are at 72% of your debt limit. And we're going to take a look at a metric or a graph in just a moment. I've also included the internal service funds on this page. Because internal service funds, you are self-insured as it relates to health insurance. You do have some self-insurance or self-retained risk as it relates to general liability insurance. And so, again, these things can fluctuate. The purpose of having or being self-insured or having an internal service fund is that you charge out the respective departments and funds the appropriate dollars in order to pay the costs. Well, you can have years in which your costs are higher than what you anticipated, and so it's just important to monitor the results of the internal service funds so that during the budget process you're setting the appropriate rates in order to cover the costs associated with those activities. So with that, we're going to look at some of the trend analysis. Again, this is the general fund fund balance. So this takes a look at a 5-year picture, taking a look at total fund balance. On average, when I average the 5 years of fund balance, you've been at about 10.7 million of total fund balance. You're at 10.1 million at the end of 2014. Again, I think it's important to be looking at that unassigned metric, however, and taking a look at what that has looked like compared to your unassigned or compared to your general fund expenditures. So as you're going through the budget process, that'll certainly be an important metric to evaluate. This is just, again, for your reference purposes, again, what the different fund balance categories, what they mean. I think a very important indicator is taking a look at how did you do compared to budget. That's really your plan, what you set out to do for the year. And for 2014, I don't think there should be too many surprises here in terms of the actual results. In terms of revenues, you were spot on, less than 1% different from your final budget, and you came in slightly higher than your final budget. And we have a slide in a couple slides that will give you some of the items that contributed to that. Then moving down to the expenditure segment, you were 1% under budget, so again came in very close to what you had budgeted. And then your other financing sources, sale of city property and transfers in. Transfers in, this represents the tax equivalent that the water utility pays over to the general fund every year. So we take a look at what the overall value of the plant is, of your water facilities, and then there's a tax that the water utility pays over to the general fund. But ultimately, I think an important thing to look at is you had planned to use about $950,000 of fund balance. So actually drawing down your fund balance, you drew down less than that, $667,000 approximately, and drew down fund balance about $280,000. So overall, you came very close to your budgeted results, but in the end, you did better than what you had budgeted. And on the next page really talks about some of those variances. Some of those are listed here, some of the more significant ones. Again, you came in so close to budget though, but some things to mention are unrealized gains on investments. The city does have a significant investment portfolio, and at the end of the year, the city does mark the investments to market, and so you could have situations where you could have a fluctuation both to the positive or to the negative. We've talked about that in the past, where sometimes if the market's down, now the city is limited in terms of what investments it can invest in for security purposes, and again, if the city intends to hold its investments to maturity, usually this itself will balance itself out. The payment in lieu of tax was more than budgeted, and then licenses and permits were more than what was budgeted. Actual expenditures were lower than what was budgeted. A significant area was the finance and administrative services, and again, I'll just give you a page reference. Page 92 of the financial statements would give you more detail as it relates to that. This is another trend that I think is important to take a look at, as we were talking about the general obligation debt before. The top line would be your debt limit, and you can see from 2010 to 11 to 12 to 13, that was declining. That's very consistent with what was happening in the state of Wisconsin. You will see, though, that that is trending up for 2014. You know, that's really a number that you don't have a lot of control over. We did see a number of our clients, though, where that turned positive for 2014. What that does do is it provides you more flexibility in terms of your borrowing needs because it does create that GO debt capacity. What I do think is another important metric, though, to take a look at is if you look at the GO debt outstanding, which is the bottom line, for the last 4 years that has been trending down. And you can see that it is at a low for the last 5 years of approximately $53 million of GO debt outstanding. Now the vast majority of that is for city-type projects. The utilities do have a small portion of GO debt. The utilities typically borrow revenue bonds, and the revenue bonds are paid and secured by the charges for services of the utilities. So I would say this is a positive trend in terms of growth of your GO debt limit, and again, as the GO debt is coming down. So again, hopefully, not many surprises and overall good financial results. Before I shift to the utilities, are there any questions regarding the general fund debt position? Okay, then let's move forward to the utility results. And I would say it's very important as we look at the overall fiscal health of a community. It's not just the general fund, it's not just the GO debt position, but it's also taking a look at the fiscal health of the utility funds. Utility funds or enterprise funds are intended to stand on their own. It's intended that the charges that are charged are enough to cover the costs, as well as to pay debt service, to be funding replacement, and so forth. And so it is very important to be monitoring the fiscal health of the utilities. So first we'll start with the water utility, and you'll see water sold. This is definitely a trend in the industry as well. The amount of water sold by the industry in general is going down. People are conserving, they're buying fixtures to conserve, they're trying to find ways to save money. But in general, cost, as it relates to the water, the costs are continuing to go up or at least stay steady. So the top line on this graph is the revenue stream of the utilities, and then below that are the expenses related to the utilities. Below that are some metrics that we take a look at, the first being unrestricted cash and investments. And it is recommended to have 3 months of unrestricted cash on hand. And the utility does have about 3.5 months of unrestricted cash on hand. This allows for unexpected items that might arise, or as equipment or items that need replacement, so that you're not always in a position where you need to borrow. The water utility is a regulated utility. It's regulated by the Public Service Commission. And so when you go to set rates for the utility, the Public Service Commission essentially tells you what an appropriate authorized rate of return is, and that's how the rates are structured. You are meeting, or you're generating slightly less than what your authorized rate of return is. And then debt coverage. This takes a look at from the bonds that you borrow. It specifies how much earnings you need to have in earnings for the water utility and to ensure that you're able to make the principal and interest payments. So the last rate change for the water utility was in 2010. You are meeting the requirements. You are slightly below the authorized rate as it relates to rate of return. We would just say this is a utility you're going to want to continue to monitor, just because, again, the trends are water usage is going down, and typically your costs are going to stay the same or maybe going up inflationary. And as you're looking at capital needs and so forth, monitoring rates would certainly be appropriate. So then we move on to the sewer utility, and sewer utility for volume billed is going to follow water. So to the extent that water usage is down, typically volume for sewer is going to go down as well, except for wholesale customers and industrial customers, where there's not necessarily that linkage. So you will see that there has been a growing gap. The top line is expenditures, or expenses in this case, the bottom line being operating revenues, and there has been a gap that has been growing between revenues and expenses, and rates have not been adjusted since 2003 as it relates to the sewer utility. So if we do look at the metrics below, I mean, the sewer utility certainly has adequate unrestricted cash on hand, and it's meeting its debt coverage. But given the length of time that it has been since the rates have been adjusted, this again would be a utility that I would be focusing some attention on, you know, taking a look out to see if this is going to continue to meet the needs. The next utility, and just two more to discuss, the next being the stormwater, storm utility. Again, in this case, the operating revenues have been positive, and you've been covering the expenses as it relates to the stormwater utility. So both the operating cash as well as debt coverage appear to be appropriate as it relates to your stormwater utility. And lastly, you have transit, the first line or top line being ridership as it relates to transit, followed by revenues and operating expenses. Again, this is a utility to monitor closely because, you know, there were an increase in operating costs in 2014, and again, ridership is going to play have a huge impact in terms of what the operating results would be for the transit utility. So overall, healthy utilities, but I would say the water utility and sewer are the two utilities that we would urge you to take a look at the operating results or the rates for those particular utilities. So before I move to our other communication, any questions as it relates to the results of the city or the utilities? Okay, then lastly, I would like to mention a report that we issue every year, and it's the communication to those charged with governance and management. And just a reminder for those of you who've been on the council for a number of years, and you know, new information to those of you who are new to the council. Again, it's a lot of information, but there's 4 segments to this letter or communication. The first being we're required to report in writing anything that we determine to be a material weakness. We do not audit the controls of the city, but we do need to gain an understanding of the control environment as part of our audit work, and to the extent we see items that we believe to be material weaknesses, we have a responsibility to put those in writing. So that makes up the first part of the report. The second part is what's referred to as a two-way communication. Every year as part of our audit process, you know, we look at different things, we visit different departments, we interview different individuals within the city. You know, it's part of our job to make sure we're always introducing an element of skepticism and again an element of surprise. It's important that we hear from you. If there's certain things that are of concern to you as part of the financial aspects of the city, we want to hear from you because we want to consider whether there's something we should be incorporating into our audit approach. So my contact information is on the slide deck, and I welcome you to reach out to me. Again, we do reach out to a number of individuals throughout the city, and we incorporate that into our audit approach. The third segment are really items that we're not required to put in writing, but they are informational things, either things happening within the industry from an accounting perspective, things that are just happening from a regulatory perspective that we think are important as governing bodies to take a look at. We are also developing a governing body webinar series because we don't have the opportunity to interact with governing bodies on a frequent basis. We are putting together, and you'll be getting more information about just information that we think may be important for you to be aware of as it relates to the audit and so forth. And then the last section is again another required communication where we're required to communicate if there have been any disagreements with management. Again, that's a pretty prescribed document, and to highlight anything that would have come to our attention as a part of the audit, any material journal entries, and that can be found in the fourth segment. So typically in the past what I've done is just open it up to questions if there's a particular item you'd like to talk about, or again, after you've had a chance to look at this document in more detail, always happy to have some additional conversation about any of the items that we have in here. Questions?
Councilor DeForest.
Thank you. I ask similar questions every year, but from my perspective, part of my responsibility as a city councilor is to understand especially the material weaknesses and where we have issues with internal controls. So I'd like to talk with you some more about that and keeping that balance with the fact that we have a very accounting and finance staff. Right. So I understand that some of those controls are very difficult given the limited number of staff we have. Do you feel comfortable as our outside auditor coming in that our internal controls, especially in terms of accounts payable and disbursements, is sufficient?
One thing I think that's important to point out is that anything that's listed in here, for it's something to be removed from here, a new control has to be in place for the entire year. So there certainly can be things that maybe progress was made during the year, but we can't take a point out until we see that that control is working for the entire year. So as it relates to the accounts payable and disbursements process, that the city is putting procedures into place in 2015, or even was at the end of 2014, that we will evaluate as part of the 2015 audit, and we will provide an update as it relates to that. Okay. So these are things that we've discussed, and I believe that if the management responses that are listed here are put into place for the entire year, those would address those comments.
Okay, and so related to that, it appeared that there seemed to be a lack of reconciliations, which was concerning. That was a theme that ran through many of the material weaknesses. So I guess my concern, and maybe this is a question for our city manager, is, if we have a situation where our finance or accounting staff is depleted again for some reason, are we going to have some kind of policy or processes in place that we don't have this lag of time where we're not having kind of appropriate finance protocols occurring? Do you know what I'm saying? It concerns me a little bit.
I'm going to allow Eric to go first, and then I'll wrap up after.
Thank you. We can address a little bit of that. A lot of that had to do with some turnover issues that had occurred during the year, and so it really was truly a timing issue when we just the accounting staff just didn't have the opportunity to kind of nail down what that unreconciled balance was, in which subsequently we were able to determine what, the vast majority of what that unreconciled amount was. It just didn't occur on a timely basis. So I think I don't want to focus on the fact that it wasn't reconciled at a particular point in time, other than we did reconcile it. So I just want to get that fact very clear that it just didn't happen at the end of the year. So I think now that the staff that we do have in place, we did bring in, we had a vacancy for a while there in our accounting department, and so with that vacancy filled, I think we're staffed well enough to be able to address those concerns going forward.
Okay, thank you.
That's also an area where I think most organizations can improve upon their business continuity plans, and what do we do if we have key positions that are vacant? How can we continue to provide services but have some backfill? And that requires a very hard look at what are the resources across the entire organization, and is it possible to borrow staff, even possibly from other locations on a temporary basis. So those are things that I think that we can look at in the future should some of those issues occur, but that's also easier said than done. So I think that that's going to be a work in progress, especially as we work on updating our emergency operations plan. The next step would be some business continuity that would include some of those components.
Wonderful.
And I do want to mention that as it relates to the cash and investment, that was brought to our attention at the time we started the audit. Okay. So we knew going in that there was a difference that the city hadn't been able to identify. We knew the amount of the difference. And so then the city, after preparing for the audit, worked to identify the source of that. So.
Okay, thank you. And I'm encouraged to hear, because I do think we're getting to the point as we're having to scale down staff, we're going to have to look at cross-training across departments, or like you said, a really creative shared persons across municipalities when needed. But I just don't want to see us not have a backup plan, I guess, so that if we do have a finance director that's gone for 6 months, that we're just hoping that everything's okay. It's too much money, taxpayer money, to kind of hope that everything's okay. So I hope I'm not, belaboring it, but I do think we need a plan of some kind.
Yep, I agree with that, and the Director of Accounting and I had sat down months ago and kind of hashed out a lot of the comments from last year and really tried to make a concerted effort on how we can address the shortfalls within the internal control, even with the limited staff, and we have been able to cross-train and borrow some of the staff within the Treasury Department as another approver for, you know, maybe transfers and such like that. So we have been able to accomplish some of that goal, but again, sometimes you're just limited to the amount of bodies that you have in order to complete a full picture of an internal control, you know, that's 100% foolproof, and unfortunately that's just not going to be the case, but we do our best to make the best decisions with the people that we have.
Thank you. And thank you for that creative working with the Treasurer's Division. That makes sense.
Sure.
Great. Thank you.
Other questions? Just in closing, then, I would like to thank Finance Director Miller and his team. Certainly a pleasure to work with, and very helpful as this is no small undertaking, and so certainly appreciate all the time and effort that they put into the process as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item 11 would be reports from boards and city officers. We have none, so let's go ahead and move on to adjournment. Item 12, do we have a motion to adjourn? So moved. Moved by Kincaid, second by Hendricks. All in favor of adjournment, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? We are adjourned.
Okay.
To go back upstairs.
I think we had two things in there.
I'm done tonight. We're not having the closed session. I am done tonight, period.
What happened?
I did it now.
What happened?